The MVP award is one of the most fiercely debated honors in basketball, and for good reason. It can completely reshape how a player is perceived. Imagine if Dwayne Wade had an MVP to go alongside his 3 championships, or if Chris Paul had one to solidify his legacy, or even if Damian Lillard had won an MVP in a role without Steph Curry. That would drastically change the conversation surrounding these players. It's no surprise then that people get so passionate about MVP debates. Over the years, we've seen plenty of MVPs face criticism. Russell Westbrook's 2017 win was dismissed by many as mere stat padding, which, to be fair, had some truth to it. Karl Malone's 1997 MVP win over Michael Jordan was largely attributed to voter fatigue rather than his own performance. Whether those arguments are valid or not, one thing is clear: the MVP race is always a topic of controversy, and when it comes to one of the most disrespected MVPs in history, Steve Nash is right at the top of the list. Steve Nash doesn't seem to get the same level of respect as others with multiple MVPs. Winning 2 MVPs, especially back-to-back, is an elite accomplishment. Other 2-time winners like Tim Duncan, Karl Malone, and Steph Curry are often ranked among the top 10 or 15 players of all time. Yet, Nash is rarely even mentioned in that conversation. It makes you wonder why. When was the last time you heard someone argue that Nash belongs in the top 10? Meanwhile, Duncan, Malone, and Curry are frequently debated for those spots. It feels like history has pushed Nash aside, and the question is, how did that happen? Nash's MVP success was largely fueled by Mike D'Antoni's 7 seconds or less offense, a system that changed the NBA with its fast pace, heavy pick-and-roll usage, and floor spacing. It turned point guards into offensive engines, and Nash fit the mold perfectly, but some argue that D'Antoni made Nash, and that without him, Nash wouldn't have even been a Hall of Famer. Others say his offensive style was built for the regular season, but wasn't sustainable in the playoffs, which explains why those Suns teams were dominant over 82 games, but fell short in the postseason. To be fair, there's some logic to this argument. Mike did help other guards thrive. Look at Jeremy Lin during Linsanity, but using that to discredit Nash ignores the fact that great players still have to execute. Coaching matters, but Nash's vision, shooting, and efficiency were elite no matter the system. Just as Phil Jackson helped Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant reach another level, that doesn't just mean that they weren't all-time greats on their own. Nash didn't just fit into his coaching system, he was the system. You can't simply replace him with guards like Mike Bibby or Baron Davis and expect the same results. Maybe someone like Tony Parker or Jason Kidd could have replicated his success, but there was a clear gap between Nash and that second tier of guards. Special results require special players, and the Suns' historically great offense needed Nash's historically great play. Now, looking at Nash's first MVP in 2005, his biggest competition was Shaq, who had just led the Miami Heat to 59 wins, and Dirk Nowitzki, who averaged 26 points and 10 rebounds. But Nash's impact was undeniable. The Suns had won just 29 games the previous season. With Nash running the show, they jumped to 62 wins, the best record in the league. Of course, critics pointed out that his stats were eye-popping. He averaged 15.5 points and 11.5 assists on 50% shooting from the field and 43% from 3. By today's standards, those numbers wouldn't even put him in the MVP conversation, where 25 or 30 points per game is almost a requirement. But what people overlook is that impact goes beyond raw numbers. Nash didn't need to score 30 to elevate his team. He made Amari Stoudemire an All-NBA player, boosted the play of Shawn Marion, and turned Phoenix into a true contender. So, did Nash deserve the MVP? Considering how much the Suns improved and how vital he was to their success, the answer is yes. His impact outweighed his stats, making his MVP win completely justified. But then came 2006, a year that made Nash's MVP case far more controversial. This is an MVP award that I actually have an issue with. You see, Nash won his second straight MVP, but the competition was much tougher this time. Kobe Bryant had one of the greatest individual seasons in NBA history, while LeBron James and Dirk Nowitzki also put up elite performances. But let's just focus on Kobe. Kobe averaged 35 points per game, the most since Michael Jordan in 1987. This was the same year he dropped 81 points in a game, put up 62 points in just 3 quarters, and carried an underwhelming Lakers team to 45 wins and a playoff spot. No player in the league meant more to their team that season. Now let's compare that to Nash's numbers. Nash did have a better scoring season than in 2005, bumping his average from 15.5 points to 18.8 points per game, though his assists slightly dropped from 11.5 to 10.5 per game. His playmaking was still elite, but the Suns actually won fewer games, 54 compared to 62 the previous year, and that was despite having a solid roster even with Amari Stoudemire, who missed most of the season due to injury. Meanwhile, Kobe dragged a team featuring Smush Parker and Kwame Brown into the playoffs in a stacked Western Conference, and that's the biggest issue with Nash winning in 2006. In 2005, you could justify his MVP by saying he completely transformed the Suns, turning them into an elite team, but that argument doesn't hold up in 2006 when the Suns just weren't as dominant. When an MVP is averaging under 20 points per game, their team's success has to be undeniable, but that wasn't the case with Nash. Yet Nash still won the award. To make matters worse for him, the Lakers nearly knocked the Suns out in the first round of the playoffs. Kobe had an iconic game for a buzzer beater and pushed Phoenix to 7 games before they eventually lost. While the MVP is a regular season award, that series only reinforced the idea that Kobe had the more dominant individual season. Another factor to consider is that Nash's lack of finals appearances is just always going to affect him. While that shouldn't take away from his regular season greatness, it does impact how his MVPs are viewed. Most two-time MVPs either won championships or at least reached the finals, but Nash consistently fell short in the playoffs, losing to elite guards like Tony Parker and Kobe himself. That hurt his legacy. So what's the final verdict? Steve Nash absolutely deserved his 2005 MVP for leading the Suns' dramatic turnaround, but in 2006, the award should have gone to Kobe. Nash had a great season, but Kobe's individual dominance and the burden he carried were on another level. Unfortunately, the MVP award often favors team success over individual brilliance, and that's why Nash won back-to-back. In the end, Nash's 2 MVPs will always be debated. He was an all-time great, but most back-to-back MVP winners have championships or finals runs to solidify their status. Meanwhile, Kobe, who only won 1 MVP in his career, had multiple seasons where he arguably deserved more. It just proves that the MVP race isn't always about the best player. It's about narratives, timing, and team success. But what do you think? Did Steve Nash truly deserve 2 MVPs? Tell me in the comment section below. Until next time, peace.